Hi there, and thanks for joining us on a special edition of Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman. Tonight is the latest in our series, WTTW News, A Safer City. We're devoting our entire program to the issues of public and community safety. We will also be prioritizing public safety in our online coverage as well as at WTTW.com/safercity. On tonight's program,
I've used ShotSpotter, and I've seen what happens. I've seen that it works.
After a heated debate, the City Council backs a measure to keep the controversial ShotSpotter technology. And outgoing Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx pitches a new policy for gun and drug charges tied to traffic stops. We kick off those conversations next.
This is not a committed.
Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors. Chicago Tonight's coverage of public safety is supported by the Su Ling Jin Charitable Foundation Initiative for Reducing Violence in Chicago.
The Chicago City Council voted 34-14 Wednesday to endorse an effort to overturn Mayor Brandon Johnson's decision to scrap the city's use of ShotSpotter. The vote came after an intense debate over the gunshot detection system. Here's Alderman David Moore defending the order he sponsored from criticism lobbed at him by Alderman Jason Irvin.
We've got to figure out something beyond one piece of technology. And again, this ordinance or this order, whatever you want to call it, doesn't do a damn thing to get us there. So again, this is about, do we want to make...
Alderman, you're out of order. Alderman.
Let's talk.
Alderman Moore, you are out of order, sir.
Okay, so that was first Alderman Jason Irvin, and then you heard Alderman David Moore trying to defend his measure there. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Heather, an interesting day. Let's start with what exactly this order would do.
Well, Alderman David Moore says it would basically do two things. One, it would require the Chicago Police Department to start collecting more data about how ShotSpotter actually works. It would also require a city council vote if the ShotSpotter system is removed from every ward. Now, there are a lot of questions about whether this order is actually legal or enforceable, but in any case, today's vote was a distinct rebuke of Mayor Brandon Johnson, who had asked the city council not to approve this measure. And as he said, he canceled ShotSpotter. This is an indication that 2/3 of the city council disagrees on some level with that decision.
Now, several black alder people appeared furious, Heather, that the city council members would even support a plan to remove a tool that they believe to be effective in crime fighting in their communities. Let's listen to 24th Ward Alderperson Monique Scott.
I am so disappointed in so many of you. I am disappointed. I had another mass shooting. I have to leave here and go to an operation for another mass shooting. This is the 4th mass shooting that I've had since being an alderwoman. So I thank all of you. I thank everyone who voted no. I thank you. This is something my community needs.
Heather, how about that? Is Alderwoman Scott right? Do people believe that ShotSpotter actually does stop crime?
Well, it depends on how you define fights crime. For many alder people, it's just common sense that if you have a system that tells the police when there are gunshots, they can get there faster and address whatever the situation is. But a report from Chicago's Inspector General found that 90% of the time that ShotSpotter sends the CPD an alert, it is not a bona fide gunshot. And also a report from Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx, who I know we'll be hearing from in a little bit, said there's no evidence that that system leads to arrests or sort of holding people accountable for crimes. So it is very much a situation where not only do alder people disagree on what to do, they disagree about the facts of the matter, which is why today's meeting was so fraught.
Okay, so there are other alder people, though, who say the system actually makes Black and Latino Chicagoans less safe. Here is 26th Ward alderperson Jessie Fuentes.
I would like to have a discussion on how we take the same money that we give ShotSpotter to either develop a system that prevents gun shooting in our community, that invests in the infrastructure in our community, because the reality is that the South and West Side communities don't have the infrastructure to keep their communities safe. The safest communities in our city don't have ShotSpotter.
Heather, what is the argument against ShotSpotter?
Well, they point to the death of 13-year-old Adam Toledo, who was shot by a Chicago police officer responding to a ShotSpotter alert. It says it sends officers into Black and brown communities in Chicago ready to fire, concerned that they are at risk and that people are at risk, and that it does nothing to prevent sort of gunfire in the first place. And that was the central argument Mayor Brandon Johnson made in the 2023 mayoral campaign. It's also what Alderman Fuentes and other progressive alder people ran on. It puts them at odds with another significant part of Mayor Johnson's base, Black alder people who have represented wards that have faced decades of disinvestment and face persistently high levels of crime and violence.
And Heather, what happens next?
Well, I asked the mayor after the city council meeting if he was prepared to veto the measure, which passed with 34 votes. So if all of those votes stay in place, the city council could override any veto, which has never happened before in city history. But the mayor said that this measure does nothing. It's unlawful. ShotSpotter remains canceled, and that he's not sure why there was so much hubbub about this measure today. Whether that will carry the day, I think, is very much an open question. This will only embolden supporters of ShotSpotter who want to see it stay in Chicago's communities.
Okay, a controversy not going away yet. Heather Sharon at City Hall for us. Thank you. And you can read Heather's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. Up next, one-on-one with Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx. But first, a look at the weather. Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx wants to change the way her office prosecutes crime and drug cases related to traffic stops. It's an issue brought into sharp focus following the police killing of Dexter Reed in March after he was pulled over for an alleged seatbelt violation. Studies show Chicago police traffic stops disproportionately target Black and Latino drivers. Under Fox's new proposal, prosecutors would not file drug, gun, and theft charges stemming from an initial traffic stop where there was no other probable cause for the traffic stop. Joining us now with more on that and so much more is Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us.
Of course.
So why do you think this particular policy is necessary?
Well, first and foremost, as you pointed out, when we're talking about traffic stops, there's been study after study that has shown that these traffic stops, particularly in the city of Chicago, disproportionately impact Black and Latino drivers. For Black drivers in particular, we're talking about they're 6 times more likely than white drivers to be pulled over. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of these stops a year. So even as we're talking about cases that come to the state's attorney's office, there's only one arrest for every 1,000 of these traffic stops. And so there's this very small number of these cases that come before us. And what we want to make sure is that these aren't fishing expeditions, that we're not using traffic stops as a means to be able to get into people's cars without probable cause. And so we believe that to stem the tide of these stops that are disproportionately impacting the Black community, that we believe are as a means to get around the constitutional obligations, changing a shift in our policy, disincentivize these types of stops.
And to be clear, this is a proposal at this point, not an effective policy.
Absolutely. We have been talking for several months, even before the death of Dexter Reed, about this, as the data has borne out over the course of the last several years. And so certainly before we implement any such policy, we want to have conversations with our law enforcement partners, as well as other stakeholders before we would implement it. So this is just a draft. These are conversations that we're starting so that we can, as an office, play a role in stemming this epidemic.
What do you make of the police department's decision to allow the consent decree to expand to include traffic stops? Is that sort of a tacit admission then that they believe that their traffic stops have been a problem?
Well, first and foremost, I am pleased to hear Superintendent Snelling say that this will be a part of the consent decree. When the consent decree was first enacted several years ago, there was a focus on stop and frisk, about stopping, again, disproportionately Black and Latino residents and patting them down, asking them what they had on them. And what we saw was a precipitous drop in stop and frisk incidents and a dramatic rise in traffic stops. And so I think the recognition that we were substituting or potentially substituting one unconstitutional method of policing for another, and saying that we should look at all of it, is, I think, very bold of the Chicago Police Department, and I commend Superintendent Brown for doing such. Why
not let your successor consider a policy like this? Why roll this out or consider rolling it out now when you've got 6 months on the job left?
Well, certainly we will continue to have conversations before we roll it out, but certainly the issue of racial equity, fairness, and justice is not something that gets put on the shelf simply because I'm leaving. I certainly hope that whomever my successor is understands and appreciates that this is a public safety issue, as we're talking about communities that feel like they don't trust police. Your segment just now about ShotSpotter, there's a whole technology that is created because people aren't calling the police. And if we don't recognize that the lack of willingness to engage with police is because of an issue of legitimacy and credibility and how these traffic stops impact that, we're gonna have debates about the latest AI technology that supplements what we should be doing, which is rebuilding trust in law enforcement.
Do you think the police killing of Dexter Reed, who we believe COPA says that he opened fire first on police officers, but was pulled over for an alleged seatbelt violation, do you think that played into your thinking at all on this?
You know, as I said, we started these conversations late last year because we'd seen a number of reports that had come out. The ACLU had done a report years ago, Impact for Equity had done a report, BEZ had done a report. There has been a number of these studies. What we saw play out with the killing of Dexter Reed and the injury to an officer was these traffic stops, not only around the legitimacy that we see in certain communities, but also the danger of them. We're asking police officers who put their lives on the line every day to go into situations that could potentially be dangerous for non-safety related issues.
Could your successor just roll this back if they don't agree with this particular policy?
You know, certainly my successor will come in and have their own set of priorities and agendas that they want to address. Again, I think this issue, as it has been researched and the evidence is clear for years, we can't simply say that we know we have a problem with these types of stops and then say, well, what do we do? And so certainly I would hope that whomever sits in the seat after I leave believes that it is a priority for keeping our communities safe.
As you mentioned, a report from Impact for Equity shows approximately 73% of the traffic stops made by Chicago police officers in 2023 were prompted by improper registration or an equipment violation, and just 2.2% of those stops led to an arrest. A gun was recovered in just 0.5% of those stops, so 0.5% according to the report, and approximately 4.4% of those stops led to a citation. What do you think those numbers tell us?
I think those numbers tell us that there is a disproportionate contact with Black drivers, with Latino drivers, that yield no safety benefit. You know, we do have the benefit of technology. We have license plate readers, for example. If we see someone who doesn't have, for example, a sticker on the back of their car, we can issue a ticket. If someone has a violation because they have a broken tail light, what is it that we're gaining by asking to search people's cars? What we are seeing is this being used as an effort to look for people who are dangerous. And what we're finding is we're not finding that. But what we are doing is profiling communities, profiling members of those communities, who then we're asking, when we need them to help us, why they don't want to work with us. It has a negative impact on public safety.
What's been the reaction from the prosecutors in your office? How's this gone?
You know, certainly we pulled together a team of prosecutors as we were talking this through. And as you would well imagine, you know, there is a concern for prosecutors who've done this work about that 0.5%. There will be those who will say, but listen, there are people who this has netted guns or drugs. And what do we do about that? And that is a legitimate concern. And then there are others who recognize and who have themselves been pulled over, who have themselves as prosecutors. You know, I have an assistant who was working in our felony review unit talking a couple years ago about how when she was leaving a police station, having looked at a case, she was pulled over. And what that does. We've had conversations, particularly from members of our staff who are Black, who've said that they've had the talk about driving while Black. And so it's been an interesting dynamic for communities that have been impacted, even as prosecutors, and those who have not seen that personally, but are concerned about public safety. And we want to incorporate all of those conversations. I'm not suggesting that one isn't right, but it is worth the conversation.
I guess I'm trying to get a sense of, you know, a scenario. If an officer should pull someone over for a broken tail light or expired registration, and they happen to spot a gun on the back seat, what does your office do? You still prosecute that?
Certainly. So we obviously will have exception. What we're saying is that don't even do the pull over for purposes of searching a car. So what happens if a gun is laying in plain sight and you are not supposed to have a gun, the officer, again, the courts have ruled that if you see something in plain sight, you may do something. What we're seeing in a lot of these instances is I've pulled you over for a broken taillight and I'm now asking to search your glove compartment. I'm now asking to search your trunk. I'm now asking to go into the vehicle. If the initial cause for the stop was a taillight, why are you now initiating a search? And the question that we can have is, well, a person has a right to say you can't search my car. Most people in that circumstance do not want to be put in a position with law enforcement to say that, no, you can't. And that's what we're trying to eliminate.
This seems to me to be sort of a similar struggle to what we were just talking about happening in City Council, where the argument over ShotSpotter, and some people say we need to use every tool we've got to combat violence. But how do you balance that also with some of the progressive steps that you and even Mayor Brandon Johnson are trying to take?
I think we have to be honest about a strategy that by any means necessary. Because I think part of the reason that we've seen over my tenure, where we have vacated hundreds of convictions, where we have paid out tens and millions of dollars in settlements from an era where, you know, in the late 80s and early 90s, that when homicide rates were so high, that there was a sense of do anything and everything that you can to stop this. And that meant violating people's constitutional rights. It meant having a John Burge or a Detective Guevara be able to flourish because they were able to get convictions, but how were we doing it? And I think we have struggled with violence in Cook County, in the Chicago area, the entirety of my life here. And I think what we have to be honest about is not doing quick fixes that feel good in the moment, that ultimately have long-lasting harm because of the impact that we have on community by the choices that we make.
While we're on it, your reaction to what happened in City Council today with 34 alder people voting to sort of keep it, to keep ShotSpotter, though I think there's some question about their authority there.
Certainly I understand the concerns that aldermen have, particularly in neighborhoods that are impacted by violence, who have been told that this is a tool to help them combat violence. I understand that if I were an elected official who had to represent a community like that, I would want every tool at my disposal to do that. I think the question that we want to make sure is always answered is the efficacy of the tool. Is this tool doing what it is that it is telling that you are being told it does? And so I think what you are seeing play out are people who are desperate for solutions and who have been told that this is a potential solution. But I do think it requires robust conversation, particularly because of the expense, to say, does this tool do the thing that the vendor, this is a vendor product, that the vendor says that it does? And if it doesn't, what are the other ways that we can invest those resources to keep our community safe?
At the core of some of these issues is constitutional policing, and at the moment the Chicago Police Department's in full compliance with just 6% of the consent decree's requirements. What are your thoughts on their efforts to comply with the consent decree and how far they've gotten at this point?
Certainly it is the reminder that the consent decree has been in place for 5 years at this point, and the reminder that that consent decree was put in place because there was a finding by the Department of Justice of unconstitutional policing and policing that had issues related to race. So even as we have this whole conversation about the traffic stops, there is a finding that we had unconstitutional policing that is significantly impacted Black and brown communities. What I will say is that in the course of the last 5 years, we've had at least 4 different police superintendents. We've had at least 3 mayors. And when you have that much transition in leadership at the top, that you will expect to see that things may not be as progressive as you would have hoped. I am very optimistic with this current superintendent who is from Chicago, who appreciates the need for reform and speaks about it with a level of authority that this is a priority. But certainly there is an impatience that people have because it has been 5 years and these issues, and again, keep surfacing in various ways, whether that's officer-involved shootings or these traffic stops that are leaving the community anxious.
Shifting gears a little bit, some have said that your election 8 years ago marked a shift, not just here, but nationwide, to several more progressive prosecutorial offices. Do you think that'll continue?
I think the pendulum often swings that we see, and we saw a tough on crime era that dominated prosecutor offices across the country for a really long time. And I think a lot of thoughtfulness about what have those policies netted us. And again, in communities like Chicago, where we still have low levels of trust, where we're investing in ShotSpotter technology because people aren't picking up the phone, what we can say is that those efforts were not as successful as we would have hoped when we're looking at homicide rates that we're seeing. I think across the country, whether it's Los Angeles or Boston or Atlanta or other places where you're seeing different nuanced conversations about prosecutors and crime, I imagine that will continue. We're even looking at the national level. President Biden is rescheduling marijuana, for example. It would have almost unheard of 8 years ago, the legalization of marijuana, the vacating of marijuana convictions. And so I'm seeing, not just on the local prosecution level, but nationally at the federal level, a re-examination of how we use our criminal justice resources.
You've got 6 months left. Anything that you feel like you need to get done in those last 6 months?
It's impossible to do everything in the course of 4 years or even 8. My priority obviously is, continuing to deal with the issue of violent crime every single day and making sure that our policies and practices are fair and just. Certainly, we're going to continue to look at, the day-to-day prosecution of crimes, wrongful convictions, ensuring that we do as much as we can before we leave, and working to build a strong transition for my successor.
Any hints on what you'll be doing next?
I have not afforded myself too much of a chance to sit and think about things that I might want to do as the mother of 4 young people who are going off to college in an office of our size. But certainly I've gotten opportunities or offers to teach, which is something that I think is interesting. and looking at the system as a whole. As one who believes in root causes for a lot of the issues that we're seeing, my mind is also wandering to the possibility of what does it look like to not just practice law, but to think on a bigger and more global scale on some of these intractable issues.
Couple seconds left. Biggest challenges ahead for your successor?
Trust and legitimacy. I think, as you point out, we still will have that consent decree. We still have neighborhoods that feel that they've been left behind. And it is those folks who are our biggest assets, and we need them to be able to work with them.
All right. State's Attorney Kim Foxx, we look forward to having you back again sometime.
Of course.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that is our show tonight. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. Amanda Vinicky will have the latest from Springfield as lawmakers try and wrap up the spring legislative session. And remembering the contributions of Latino veterans as we head toward Memorial Day weekend. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, which is proud to honor founder and senior partner Robert Clifford, who has been named in Forbes' 2024 list of America's top 200 lawyers.